Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This isn't technically my revenge, but it's a story of revenge I got to witness up close, take joy from, and slightly participate in. The background is most of the story, so this will be a bit long. Trigger warning for self-harm. I was in the Navy and stationed at the submarine base in Groton, Connecticut back in 2020. I had a friend I met in boot camp, and we were in the same class for our A school, Navy job training. Let's call that friend Alex. Alex wasn't the most physically fit guy. He was short, kind of chubby, and wore glasses. However, Alex was really smart, and as the sonar technician he was meant to be, he would have been amazing. He had a pragmatic way of looking at things that I really valued in a friend, and I know it would have made him successful if he had made it out to the fleet. While in school, we had a couple of petty officers who were real hard-asses. They somehow convinced themselves they were super soldiers, despite the fact that our jobs in that field are really nerd-centric. You get picked for that job because of your math and computer skills, not your deadlift number. These two guys, let's call them P.O. Thompson and P.O. Rodriguez, were all about being fit and working out all the time. We would do physical training 3 times a week, and while most of us could keep up, Alex often fell behind on runs or didn't quite meet what these two idiots believed to be the standard. To be clear, Alex did pass the minimum requirements for fitness. He just didn't go as extreme as these guys wanted. One day, during a particularly grueling PT session, I overheard Thompson yelling at Alex, "Move it, you fat piece of crap! My grandma can run faster than you!" Alex, gasping for air, tried to explain, "Sir, I'm trying my best." "Your best isn't good enough, sailor," Rodriguez chimed in. "Maybe you should just quit and save us all the trouble." The end result was that they would constantly berate and belittle Alex. They'd call him fat, lazy, and everything else. They'd tell him he should kill himself, you name it. They were always on his ass, despite him passing his assessments. At some point, Alex pushed himself too hard and injured his knee. He told Thompson and Rodriguez he was injured and had been seen by the doc on base. The doc had put him on light duty so the knee could recover. He had the paperwork to back it up. They elected to ignore that and threaten him with kicking him out if he didn't do the workouts. So, Alex kept pushing himself, injuring himself more, and his mental health degraded the whole time. In my time in the Navy, you didn't get mental health services really. The only person to talk to like that was the chaplain. For those who don't know, the chaplain is the religious leader, usually a pastor/priest/rabbi that has signed up as a commissioned officer. Our chaplain was Commander Sarah Johnson, the sweetest little woman you ever met. But as a chaplain, she held the rank of commander, a high-ranking officer. So Alex set up a meeting with Commander Johnson to talk about things. When Alex informed Thompson and Rodriguez he would be missing class the next day for his chaplain meeting, they yelled at and berated him more. "You're a ducking pussy, Martinez," Thompson sneered. "The chaplain doesn't give a crap about your problems. Nobody does." "Yeah," Rodriguez added. "If you go to that meeting, we'll make your life a living hell. You think it's bad now? Just wait." They convinced Alex he was being weak and that Commander Johnson wouldn't care about his issues, that nobody would care. They promised to make life even harder if he didn't show the next day, so he canceled his meeting. As if things couldn't get worse, that night Alex's girlfriend broke up with him. She wasn't worth his time or money, but he couldn't see that at the time. That night I awoke to a 3 a.m. call from Alex. I couldn't hear anything, and I asked several times, "Alex, you there? Are you okay?" It wouldn't have been the first time that I got a drunk dial from one of my friends after a hard day like Alex had. Sailors have been known to drown their sorrows a bit. Eventually, I figured it was a butt dial or drunk dial and hung up and went back to bed. I still regret that decision. The next day, all hell broke loose. Me and a couple other friends got calls from Alex's now ex-girlfriend informing us he was in the hospital because he slit his own throat. Turned out a few of us got that 3 a.m. call, but Alex couldn't speak at the time and was kind of out of it due to blood loss. We finished what we had to do on base and rushed over to the hospital. As we got there, Commander Johnson was on her way out, and we passed her in the hallway. She spoke to us briefly to say that Alex would be okay and she wouldn't forget this. I have never seen a look on someone's face that so accurately depicted raw, unfiltered rage. It took us all by surprise because she was such a small, sweet, and personable lady. But the look in her eyes, you could just tell she wanted someone to pay for this. She wanted revenge, and we all knew she wore the kind of rank that could get it done. We visited Alex, who could barely talk, but he told us the story of what had happened, what he was thinking at the time, and how glad he was it didn't work. Apparently, it was cold enough that the blood clotted on the outside of his neck and made a kind of patch that kept him alive long enough for the EMS to find him and get him to a hospital. The doctor said he missed his carotid by about a millimeter. A week went by, and we hadn't heard anything until we got called in by Chief Ramirez, the boss of these petty officers. He said he wanted to check on the rest of us and make sure there weren't any other issues with these guys he wasn't aware of and that we were all okay. I let him know about an ass-chewing Thompson gave me a few months back, that I was really set up by these guys and they had lied to him. My friends cited a couple of other examples of their own with these guys being generally crappy, dishonest people. I don't think it mattered. I think their fates were already sealed, and we were being asked for more ammo to bury them with. The next day, Thompson and Rodriguez were nowhere to be found, and we were introduced to new instructors who would be taking over our training permanently. After class, I decided to stop by and ask Commander Johnson what happened. She told me, "In all my years of service, I have never been more disgusted by the actions of sailors than I am by those two who convinced someone not to come see me." Her voice trembled with anger as she spoke. She teared up a bit, regretting that she didn't get the chance to help Alex before he made his attempt. In her mind, it was these two that precipitated and enabled Alex's attempt. So on to the revenge. Commander Johnson told me she went to Rear Admiral Parker, who was in charge of the entire base, and demanded their immediate discharge. He granted it. Both petty officers were immediately processed out with other than honorable discharges. I can't remember the exact charge I heard they cited for it, but I know the Navy has a way of selling BS on paper when they want a certain outcome, especially officers at that high level. So basically, they get no VA benefits of any kind, got kicked out of the base housing they lived in, and could probably only find work at a gas station or under-the-table stuff somewhere. Also, I know from someone else who got the boot that the Navy only pays for a single bus ticket to get you back home, not your family or any of your belongings. When you have a discharge like that, no company with DoD contracts is allowed to hire you. That includes McDonald's because they have stores on bases throughout the country, Taco Bell, Subway, etc. None of them will give you a job. They can't, and they don't want to anyway, so I don't know where these guys went or what became of them, but I know their lives were irrevocably ruined. Thompson had about 18 years in, so he was 2 years from retirement and lost it all. Rodriguez was at about 12 years, so he also lost a lot. Wherever they are now, I'd be very surprised to hear they're making more than minimum wage. As for Alex, well, he made a full recovery. He got a full medical discharge, which is an honorable discharge that meant E5 pay for the rest of his life, full benefits, and a referral to a counselor in his home state once he got back there. All paid for by the Navy. We lost touch over the years, but I did see on Facebook he got himself together, became a firefighter, and got married. Last I heard, he was doing really well and even volunteering at a local crisis hotline, helping others who were struggling with mental health issues. I often think back to that time and wonder how things might have been different if Thompson and Rodriguez had shown even a shred of compassion. But in the end, their cruelty caught up with them, and Alex got a second chance at life. It's a stark reminder that in the military, as in life, your actions have consequences. Sometimes those consequences can be life-changing, for better or worse. For those curious about the specifics, their discharges were actually other than honorable OTH, but we always used dishonorable colloquially for OTH bad conduct discharge because they all mean you got the boot and your life is gonna suck. They didn't do full court-martial or any brig time, but I did hear they pushed it to an administrative separation board and lost. Also to clarify, Alex wouldn't get the medical at 100% just for his neck, that's true. But they wrote it up for his knee, because it was basically bone on bone inside by that point. I think they decided to do him a favor and not put him down as a mental health discharge. In the years since, I've heard the Navy's made some strides in addressing mental health issues and bullying within the ranks. It's a slow process, but stories like Alex's have helped bring about change. I just hope it continues, so no one else has to go through what he did. The next one is an entitled people's story. It was a sunny Saturday morning when I stepped outside to grab the newspaper, only to find my driveway gate missing. At first I thought I was going crazy. Did someone steal my gate overnight? But as I looked closer, I saw fresh dirt where the hinges had been. This wasn't a theft. Someone had deliberately removed my gate. I stood there dumbfounded for a minute before my neighbor Ted came jogging by. He slowed down when he saw me staring at the empty space where my gate used to be. "Morning, Jack. Everything all right?" he called out. I pointed at the gaping hole in my fence. "My gate's gone, Ted. You didn't see anyone messing with it, did you?" Ted shook his head. "Nah, didn't notice anything. But, didn't you get the homeowner association notice? They sent out an email yesterday about removing non-compliant gates." My blood started to boil. I hadn't checked my email in a couple days because of a big project at work. What do you mean non-compliant? That gate's been there since I moved in 5 years ago. Ted shrugged apologetically. Sorry, man, I don't know the details. You should probably check that email. I thanked him and stomped back inside, fired up my computer, and found the email from our lovely homeowners association. Sure enough, there it was in black and white. Dear residents, it has come to our attention that several homes in the neighborhood have installed driveway gates that do not comply with homeowner association regulations. As per Section 7.3 of the bylaws, all exterior modifications must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Any unapproved structures, including gates, will be removed at the homeowner's expense. Removal of non-compliant gates will begin immediately. Thank you for your cooperation in maintaining our community standards. Sincerely, Oakwood Estates Homeowner Association Board. I was livid. Who the hell did they think they were, tearing out people's property without so much as a knock on the door? I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Deborah Wilson, our homeowner association president. After several rings, Deborah's sickly sweet voice came on the line. Hello? Deborah? It's Jack Thompson from 237 Maple Drive. What's the deal with removing my gate without any warning? Oh, Jack, she said in that condescending tone I'd grown to hate. We sent out an email yesterday. It clearly stated that removals would begin immediately. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. Deborah, I've had that gate for 5 years. Nobody's ever said a word about it not being compliant. You can't just tear out people's property like this. I'm sorry you feel that way, Jack, Deborah replied, not sounding sorry at all. But the rules are the rules. If you'd like to install a new gate, you're welcome to submit a request to the Architectural Review Committee. Have a nice day. Before I could say another word, she hung up. I was seething. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I spent the rest of the weekend poring over our homeowner association bylaws and doing research online. Turns out, homeowner associations in our state were required to give at least 30 days notice before removing any structures, even if they violated the rules. They also needed to provide a hearing for the homeowner if requested. Armed with this information, I fired off an email to the entire homeowner association board on Monday morning. Dear board members, I am writing to formally protest the removal of my driveway gate on Saturday, May 15th. This action was taken without proper notice or due process, in violation of state law. I request an immediate hearing on this matter and demand that my gate be reinstalled at the homeowner association's expense. Furthermore, I have been in contact with several neighbors who have also had their gates removed. We are prepared to take legal action if this matter is not resolved promptly and fairly. Please respond with a hearing date within 48 hours. Sincerely, Jack Thompson. I copied every homeowner in the neighborhood on the email. Within hours, my phone was blowing up with messages from other angry residents who'd had their gates removed. By Tuesday afternoon, we had a group of 15 homeowners ready to fight back against the homeowner association's overreach. Deborah must have realized she'd stepped in it because she quickly replied with a hearing date set for the following week. But I wasn't about to let her control the narrative. I printed up flyers detailing the homeowner association's illegal actions and our rights as homeowners, then spent every evening that week going door to door to rally support. By the time the hearing rolled around, half the neighborhood showed up to back us up. We packed into the community center with Deborah and the rest of the board looking distinctly uncomfortable at the head table. Deborah tried to start the meeting with her usual bureaucratic nonsense, but I cut her off. Before we begin, I think we all deserve an explanation for why our property was illegally removed without proper notice. She sputtered for a moment before regaining her composure. As we stated in the email, those gates were not in compliance with homeowner association regulations. We have every right to remove structures that violate our bylaws. I stood up holding a copy of our state's homeowner association laws. Actually, Deborah, you don't. According to state law, homeowner associations are required to provide at least 30 days notice before removing any structures, even if they're in violation. You're also required to offer a hearing before taking action. You did neither. A murmur went through the crowd. Deborah's face turned an interesting shade of red. Well, I pressed on. Furthermore, many of these gates have been in place for years without any complaints. You can't suddenly decide they're non-compliant without going through the proper channels. We demand that all removed gates be reinstalled at the homeowner association's expense, and that any fines or fees related to this illegal action be waived immediately. The room erupted in applause. I could see the other board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats, clearly realizing they'd overstepped. One of my neighbors, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, stood up shakily. I've lived here for 20 years, and I need that gate for my dogs. Without it, they could run into the street. Are you trying to endanger our pets, Deborah? Another homeowner chimed in. Yeah, and what about security? Those gates help keep our homes safe. Did you even think about that before tearing them out? For the next hour, resident after resident stood up to voice their complaints. The board looked increasingly desperate as the meeting went on. Finally, Deborah held up her hands in surrender. All right, she said wearily. We hear your concerns. The board will convene to discuss reinstalling the gates and reviewing our policies on exterior modifications. But I wasn't about to let them off that easy. We want more than that, Deborah. We want a guarantee that this won't happen again. I propose we form a resident committee to review and update the homeowner association bylaws with a focus on protecting homeowners' rights and limiting the board's ability to make unilateral decisions like this. The room erupted in cheers. Deborah looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but she knew she was beaten. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. We'll put it to a vote. Needless to say, the vote passed overwhelmingly. Over the next few months, our newly formed resident committee worked to overhaul the homeowner association bylaws. We put in place strict guidelines for how and when the board could take action against homeowners, required multiple notices and hearings before any removals or fines, and created an appeals process for architectural decisions. As for our gates, they were all reinstalled within a week, with the homeowner association footing the bill. Deborah tried to argue that we should at least pay for the reinstallation, but one stern letter from a lawyer in our group shut that down quick. The best part? When the next homeowner association board election rolled around, Deborah found herself voted out. Turns out, ruling with an iron fist isn't a great way to win over your neighbors. Who knew? These days, our neighborhood runs a lot smoother. The new board actually listens to residents' concerns, and we haven't had any more surprise removals or ridiculous fines. My gate is back where it belongs, keeping my yard secure and my dogs safely contained. Looking back, I'm glad I decided to stand up to the homeowner association's bullying tactics. It would have been easier to just give in and follow their arbitrary rules, but sometimes you've got to fight for what's right. And in the process, we managed to create real, lasting change in our community. The whole ordeal taught me a few valuable lessons. Know your rights. If I hadn't done my research on state homeowner association laws, we might never have won this battle. It pays to educate yourself. Strength in numbers. By rallying my neighbors and presenting a united front, we were able to force the board to listen to us. One voice can be ignored, but dozens are hard to dismiss. Be persistent. It would have been easy to give up after that first frustrating phone call with Deborah, but I'm glad I kept pushing. Document everything. Keeping records of all our communications with the board and gathering evidence of their missteps was crucial in making our case. Sometimes you've got to be willing to rock the boat. Change doesn't happen if everyone just goes along to get along. Since our victory, I've had neighbors from other homeowner associations reach out for advice on dealing with their own overbearing boards. It feels good to be able to help others stand up for themselves and their property rights. Of course, not everything's perfect. We still have the occasional disagreement over things like holiday decorations or lawn maintenance. But now, instead of arbitrary decisions handed down from on high, we have open discussions and fair voting processes to resolve issues. Deborah, unsurprisingly, moved out of the neighborhood about a year after losing her position on the board. Last I heard, she was trying to start up a new homeowner association in a developing community across town. Poor bastards don't know what they're in for. As for me, I'm enjoying my quiet life behind my perfectly legal driveway gate. Every time I open it to head out for the day, I can't help but smile, remembering our David and Goliath battle against homeowner association tyranny. So, if you're facing your own struggles with an unreasonable homeowner association, remember this. You're not powerless. Know your rights, band together with your neighbors, and don't be afraid to stand up for what's right. You might just surprise yourself with what you can accomplish. And hey, if all else fails, you can always run for the board yourself. After all, if you can't beat them, join them, and then change the system from the inside out. The next one is a petty revenge story. This just happened today, and I can't believe I witnessed this. My husband, kids, and I are at a really nice hotel. My family, along with a few other families, were enjoying the pool, hot tub, and separate water slide. Everyone was really well behaved, no kids screaming or acting rowdy. 2 boys, around 8 or 9 years old, decided to step into the hot tub. There was no one in there, and they were being careful and taking their time to get in. Then came Karen, who had been drying off and putting on her robe. Karen is about 65, 70 years old, short gray hair, tall and thin. Karen goes up to the one boy and starts telling him off and demand that he gets out right away. I didn't hear everything she was saying at first, but it caught my attention when she was wagging a finger at the poor boy who had been minding his own business. It was when I heard her tell him to get out that I looked at my husband across the pool. Without a word exchanged between us, we started heading towards the stairs, the exit, the pool. As we are moving, Karen starts in on the other boy who was just sitting on the side with his feet in. Boy leaves, obviously upset, and heads to his mom. Karen moves back to her seat beside the pool and continues to dry off with a smug look on her ugly face. She didn't even want to use the hot tub. Cue pettiness. Without even talking to each other, a bunch of us adults yell out for our kids, and we filled the hot tub, including inviting the boys she just bullied, back into the hot tub with us. In fact, there were more kids than adults. The adults stared at Karen and basically dared her to say anything. She got really uncomfortable and grabbed her stuff and her husband and left. If they were being rowdy or unsafe, then I can understand wanting to step in, but she was just being nasty to kids for no reason. I got to talk to their mom and them. They were just really sweet boys, just trying to enjoy their vacation. I am glad we got them some hot tub time. The next one is an entitled people's story. To set the stage, I used to live in a big but not huge city. Let's call it Palmville. I lived near the corner of a dense suburb nestled between overstuffed apartment buildings, a river that smelled like diesel when at low tide, and two busy highways. I was a minority in this neighborhood, and I caught a lot of heat for it. People didn't really like white people there, but enough of our neighbors were accepting of us that aside from a few disagreements between families and the beatings that came with them, I didn't feel like I was in danger when leaving my home. It was a rough neighborhood, but it was my home and it protected its own. The community center was like a temple, and let's call her AM was the priestess. In our neighborhood, she was respected like a living deity, and her calm and understanding reflected her status. I never once saw her behave without a strong moral code. And the final piece to set this stage, our former landlord. Short Asian lady in all the stereotypical ways, kind and sweet. Our house was above my parents' pay grade, and she knew it. She went out of her way to find house repair and maintenance jobs for tenants that were having money problems. She'd pay them by taking chunks out of their rent, oftentimes a bit larger than how much the work they did was worth. Looking back, that was probably illegal. But that's irrelevant because she died. The circumstances surrounding her death were suspect, but none of the suspects play a part in this story, so there's no need to go into detail on it. Her sons, who wanted nothing to do with real estate, took over the business. They couldn't make heads or tails of how she managed to float books with so much red in them and began dumping properties. Ours was on that list. I harbor no ill will towards them and still wish them the best, but the guy who bought the house entered the sociopath and today's victim. This guy wasted no time in making our lives hell. His first action was to raise the rent. Apparently, when the account changed hands, he was allowed to update the rent to modern pricing. We'd been there for several years, and were paying below market even from the onset, so this was a huge blow by itself. The second blow came when he said that the rent had to be ready, in full, on the first of every month. No partial payments, no work to reduce it, no extensions. Full rent on the first of the month, or an eviction notice on the second. This was hemorrhaging our savings, but we were surviving for the moment. Meanwhile, AM had lobbied hard for the city to co-fund a revival project to renovate the entire aging suburb, and she succeeded. One street at a time had conga lines of work trucks almost every day, and people were getting old leaky pipes replaced, sinkholes in yards patched, fences repaired, paint renewed. It was an amazing thing. And an enticing thing for the sociopath. Being at the corner of the neighborhood, our house was on the last street on the list, and sociopath wanted us out so he could relist the house after renovation. He never said this directly, but multiple conversations made his intent clear even for 10-year-old me. Random inspections, overhyping of minor problems with the house, even so far as trying to bring us up on completely false animal abuse charges because our cat was attacked by what we believe was a raccoon, and he tried to claim we did it. Yeah, because a vet can't figure out the difference between knife wounds and a mauling. We read the writing on the wall and began preparations to move. We decided to move in with my oldest brother in a place I'll call Banjo Land. Most of us had moved except my other brother, who stayed behind because he still had a lot of social ties in Palmville, and his new job meant if he cut corners, he could keep paying sociopaths inflated bills. Well, despite his best efforts, he came up $20 short 1 month, and sociopath jumped on it. He had 30 days. We made the 400-mile trip from Banjo Land to Palmville to get the rest of our stuff, and I can't say as I approved of my brother's living conditions, but I guess that's beside the point. The month passed rather uneventfully. I guess Sociopath figured he'd won, so there was no need to burn the gas to drive out and gloat. The neighborhood had learned what was going on, and that was the first time I'd ever been back in that neighborhood where I didn't get a single call-out, a single glare, a single racist remark. Everybody behaved reverently. It was kind of disturbing in all honesty. I guess people in lower incomes all know what eviction means and felt like I was having a bad enough time already. Well, 20 days later, he says it's time to leave. We still had a week left, but it didn't matter. We didn't have the money to try fighting it with a lawyer. AM descended from the heavens and bought us a couple of extra days, but it was evident he really, really wanted us out. Possibly because the work trucks were now one street away. The last time I ever saw the house I grew up in, workmen were throwing my childhood possessions into a large bin when we supposedly still had 3 days left to leave. Everything that follows is a collection of information I got through the grapevine and phone calls with people present at the events. Immediately, Sociopath moved into the house himself. Why, you may ask? People who owned the homes they were living in were getting the full cost of renovations comped by the city. He figured that by moving in himself, he'd be able to get this house he bought at liquidation price renovated for free and flip it. AM was having none of it. She explained to him that at the time the revival project was approved, that house was a rental lot and they can't change the budget now. She then explained to him that the partial cost coverage that had been approved for the lot was in our name, not his, and he wasn't eligible for partial cost comping either. He'd have to pay every penny himself, and since the entire neighborhood was getting a facelift, he was required to at least renovate the exterior. Otherwise, she'd see the house condemned as an eyesore or dilapidated or whatever the legal term is. He went really cheap on the renovations, basically put in new carpets and a coat of paint. This would later come to bite him in the ass. He then began trying to sell the house in earnest. The neighborhood remembered what he'd done. There were vandalisms when nobody was there, and loud noises from the neighbors when people were there to look at the house over, and any time a prospective buyer asked around, they got the full stink eye from anybody they talked to. They made sure he simply couldn't get that house sold at market value. After 3 months of this, he lowered the listing price. Then a month later, he lowered it again and finally got a bite. AM personally made sure he had to file every single piece of paperwork before it changed hands. Every single part of the house had to be inspected thoroughly. And that's when Karma herself caught up with him. In his hasty and cheap renovations, he'd somehow damaged the pipes. Black mold. AM remembered how he'd treated us, and she decided to pay him back in kind. I never heard how exactly she pulled it off, but she managed to delay him getting the news about the black mold being discovered for several days, long enough that by the time he did get the news, he didn't have enough time left to try getting it cleaned or make a last-ditch effort to save the house. The house was condemned days later. In their final act, AM and members of the neighborhood filed every single complaint and injunction they could, and arranged for him to be compelled by the city to demolish the house immediately, a cost he had to pay out of his own pocket. He tried to destroy a family and broke laws just to make some quick cash, and instead was left fighting a year-long legal battle and ended up losing thousands. The neighborhood remembers, the neighborhood punishes. The next one is an entitled people story. Hey there, my name is Sarah, and I have a story to tell about my neighbor Jessica. I live in a suburban neighborhood in the northeastern United States. It's a nice area with well-kept houses and friendly neighbors. My husband and I have lived here for over a decade, and we've always gotten along well with everyone on our block. A few years ago, we decided to add an in-ground swimming pool to our backyard. We had always wanted one, and we finally had the money to make it happen. We hired a reputable pool company and started the construction process. At first, everything was going smoothly. The construction workers were friendly and professional, and they were making great progress on the pool. We were excited to finally have a place to relax and cool off during the hot summer months. But then, things started to go wrong. One day, we came home to find that someone had dumped a ton of dirt and debris into the pool. It was a huge mess, and we had no idea how it had happened. We suspected that someone had deliberately sabotaged our pool, but we didn't know who or why. We decided to clean up the mess and move forward with the pool construction, but we were on high alert for any other signs of sabotage. A few days later, we noticed that our neighbor Jessica had been acting strangely. She would glare at us whenever we were outside and would make snide comments under her breath. We had always been friendly with Jessica, so we didn't know why she was suddenly acting this way. One afternoon, while my husband and I were sitting outside enjoying the sun, Jessica stormed over to our yard and started yelling at us. She accused us of putting the pool on her property and demanded that we take it down immediately. We were shocked and confused. We had made sure to follow all the necessary regulations and had the property surveyed before starting the construction. We knew that the pool was on our property, not hers. But Jessica was relentless. She kept insisting that the pool was on her property and threatened to take legal action if we didn't remove it. We tried to reason with her and show her the property survey, but she wouldn't listen. Finally, we decided to hire a lawyer to help us deal with the situation. We didn't want to escalate things, but we also didn't want to be bullied out of having our dream pool. After a few weeks of back and forth with Jessica and her lawyer, it was determined that the pool was indeed on our property. We were relieved, but also frustrated that we had to go through all this trouble to prove something that was so obvious. The pool construction was completed without any further incidents, and we were finally able to enjoy it. We invited our neighbors over for a pool party, and everyone had a great time. But we still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Jessica. A few weeks later, we came home from a weekend trip to find that someone had poured a ton of chemicals into our pool. The water was bright green and smelled terrible. We immediately called the pool company, and they determined that the chemicals were toxic and had caused significant damage to the pool. We knew that it had to be Jessica. She was the only one who had been acting strange and hostile towards us, and this was too much of a coincidence. We called the police and reported the incident, but there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence. We were devastated. We had spent so much money and time on the pool, and now it was completely ruined. We decided to take legal action against Jessica, but we knew that it would be a long and difficult process. Eventually, after months of legal battles, we were able to prove that Jessica had indeed sabotaged our pool. She was ordered to pay for the damages and was also fined for trespassing and vandalism. We were relieved that justice had been served, but we were also saddened by the fact that our relationship with our once friendly neighbor had deteriorated so much. But the story doesn't end there. About a year after the incident, we received a letter in the mail from Jessica. In the letter, she apologized for her behavior and explained that she had been going through a difficult time in her life. She had been struggling with depression and anxiety, and had become convinced that we were out to get her. She had never intended to cause us harm, but her mental state had clouded her judgment. We were surprised by the letter, but also touched by Jessica's vulnerability and honesty. We decided to meet with her and hear her out. We had no intention of becoming friends with her again, but we wanted to give her a chance to explain herself and make amends. We met with Jessica at a local coffee shop, and she opened up to us about her struggles. We listened and offered support and encouragement. It was a difficult conversation, but also a healing one. In the end, we were able to forgive Jessica for what she had done. We knew that mental illness can be a powerful force, and that it can cause people to do things they wouldn't normally do. We also knew that we didn't want to hold on to anger and resentment. Today, Jessica and her family have moved away from our neighborhood, but we still keep in touch with her. She has gotten the help she needed for her mental health issues and is doing much better. We're glad that we were able to find a way to move past the hurt and come out stronger as a community. The experience taught us a lot about forgiveness and empathy, and we're grateful for that lesson. We also installed even more security measures to protect our property just in case. But we know that sometimes the best way to move forward is to let go of the past and focus on the present. The next one is a petty revenge story. This may be the pettiest thing I have ever done in my life. I'm a pretty petty person and I also believe in malicious compliance, but this takes the cake. So, I bought a condo in a building in a large city in the US about 2.5 years ago. The building has a homeowners association, HOA, that we all pay into monthly. Since I've lived here, the building has rapidly deteriorated, and we have all hired an attorney for a class action style lawsuit. I'm talking broken elevators, broken rooftop AC units. The pool was empty for 4 months during the summer, etc. The people in the building are great though, and we are a friendly bunch. Last year, I took the HOA to small claims court because they failed to provide financial documents that show us how our fees are being spent. As this is a legal requirement for all HOAs in my state, I won the case and was awarded the $30 filing fee plus $1 symbolic. I sued for documents, not money. The fact that they can't provide the docs as they are legally required to do is a separate issue among others, including possible wrongdoing, that we've hired the attorneys for. I have asked the HOA to pay the $31 to me, and the president of the HOA wants to either meet me somewhere private to give it to me, or he wants to mail me a satisfaction of judgment form, have me sign it and mail it back to him, and then he will mail me a check. No to both. 3 days after I won the case, the HOA announced that they were going to charge us all a special assessment of about $1,000 each, and an increase in our monthly dues of 10%. In my state, a membership vote gets triggered if you charge a special assessment that brings the building more than 5% its yearly income, which means 51% of the owners must approve the assessment for it to take effect. As this dollar is about 20% of our yearly income, a vote should have taken place. When we asked about this vote, the HOA said that it was being made under an emergency clause, which means that the membership vote doesn't have to take place. The emergency? Fixing the elevator that broke on December 24th, 2021. The spirit of the emergency clause is for things like fire, earthquake, flood, etc., not a broken elevator that has been broken for a year already. When there was understandable pushback, the HOA sent out a little email stating that anyone who didn't pay the assessment would have a lien put on their unit. The liens came down yesterday on those that couldn't pay $1,000 on short notice. Our attorneys told us that even though the money is in dispute, we still have to pay it, and I did pay mine, but we also have a lot of retirees/lower income people in the building. The HOA president's house is currently on the market for $20,000. I just got back from the courthouse where I filed a $31 lien against it for $140, clouding its title. It's a matter of principle, not money. Now the title can't change hands until he pays me my $31, and I am perfectly within my rights to collect on a judgment owed. The next one is an entitled people story. A couple of years ago, my DH and I bought a house from the city council. We had seen it, loved everything about it and the neighborhood. Inspection showed that everything, apart from the central heating boiler, was in good order. We still needed to replace the central heating boiler. We also renovated the bathroom and stairs, and we placed a new kitchen. Between then and now, we have invested money in our home. Among other things, we placed solar panels, renovated the front and back garden, and renovated our downstairs toilet. For reference, we have lived here for around 6 years now, and we have no intention of moving. Apart from the fact that we have put a lot of money into the house, we love the neighborhood, our neighbors, and the fact that we are close to family and friends. The way the council sold houses went as follows. The house was up for sale for 6 weeks. If you were interested, you could schedule a visit with the real estate agent, place a bid if you wanted, and then after the 6 weeks, the city council would look at all the bids and see who offered the most. 2 weeks ago, I was home when a lady rang the doorbell. She introduced herself and told me that when the house came up for sale all those years ago, she and her husband were interested. They could see the potential, but their bid was rejected. She was enthusiastic about how it looked now, from what she could see, and how beautiful the garden was, how wonderful the solar panels were and such. So I thanked her for her compliments and waited for the reason why she rang the doorbell. She told me that since they had more money saved, she and her husband wanted to know if we were interested in selling them the house. I told her that we were not interested. She started whining and gave an offer, and I told her the same. Not interested at all. More whining ensued, and she made a new offer. I kindly drew the line and said that she can offer all she wants. We love living here, and we want to enjoy our home with the family we've built in it. Then I told her that I had things to do, wished her a good day, and closed the door. I had barely turned around when she started ringing the doorbell continuously. So I opened the door and asked her what she needed to say. She told me this, almost verbatim. "You need to sell us this house. You have lived here for some years now. My husband and children deserve a nice house like this. I gave you 2 offers that are very reasonable. It's our turn now, so sell us the house. We want to live here." I told this woman that her offers were laughable. She gave 2 offers while we knew that we could ask for double the price and get that still. She lowballed. I reiterated that we were not interested and would not sell the house. I asked her to leave and closed the door again. Like before, she started ringing the doorbell like a madwoman. After trying to ignore it, I ripped open the front door and shouted in her face for her to get lost. We are not interested. Even if we were, I would not sell my house to her since she's acting like a spoiled brat. I wouldn't want my neighbors to deal with her spoiled attitude. I told her that she doesn't need to think about trying to bully us into moving and to get the duck away, or I would call the police. This time I slammed the door to get the message across. She stayed, screaming at the door that we have to sell the house to her, and walked around a bit before leaving. I did send a message in our street's group app about her. People have said to keep an eye out for her. My DH was stunned when I told him this, since this is not a normal thing in our country to do. She has been seen once or twice, but has not caused problems for us or anyone else. The next one is an entitled parent story. I work at a car dealership as a receptionist, and one of my duties is to greet customers when they enter. I am also a professional artist on the side and have been busy with some commissions lately. Since it's not busy at the dealer, I started working on my iPad mini. It's old and I'm working on upgrading, but I currently can't afford it. So I live with it, despite the battery life being really short, and I have to keep it plugged in at all times. During my lunch break, I was in the waiting area doing more work when a kid, a little girl no older than 4, came up and watched me work. This happens a lot when I draw in public, and usually the kids just ask a lot of questions. But this NG, nice girl, was very quiet and just had a look of amazement, so I let her be. Her mother, the EM in the story, was nearby at a salesman's desk working on purchasing a new car, which is a long and no doubt boring process. The salesman working with her walked away, which at my dealership they do very often to retrieve paperwork, talk to the sales finance managers, etc. She looks over at me and her kid and asks her, "What are you looking at?" Her kid points at my screen and says, "She's painting puppies!" I was working on Twitch emotes of a streamer's dog. I sort of show my screen to EM and she then asks her kid if she wants to draw, which the girl excitedly said yes. I expected EM to pull out paper and pencils or at least ask if I can get some for her too, but she just looked at me expectantly. When I realized she was waiting for me to hand her my iPad, I said, "Oh, she can't use mine, but I can get her a notepad and pens." But apparently that wasn't good enough. She sighs and says, "Just let her draw a little bit. I'm almost done here anyway." Which I knew for a fact wasn't true. They were waiting for bank approval for a loan, which can take anywhere between 5-30 minutes, and even then, they'll be here longer for finance paperwork, detailing, etc. I start to explain that this is part of my work, and she scoffs, saying I'm just doodling puppies, and it was selfish that I wouldn't let NG doodle on my device too. Poor NG was just looking at her hands, looking quite embarrassed. I then pretended my lunch was over and got up to spend the rest of my lunch at my desk. I couldn't see her behind a huge truck on display, but I could hear her grumble to NG about who knows what. Whatever, pretend like I didn't hear so I don't mess up this sale for my coworker. Sometime later, Nature called me, and I got up to use the restroom. I left my iPad on my seat so it'll stay plugged in and put a notepad over it to try to cover it up somehow. My desk is a wide crescent shape with no drawers to keep my things safe, so this was the best I could do to somewhat hide it. I was in the restroom no longer than 3 minutes, but when I got back, only my charger remained. My iPad and Apple Pencil were gone. I looked over to the lady who had her large purse suspiciously in her lap now instead of on the floor beside her chair like it was before. I was panicked because a lot of my work is on that iPad that I needed. I went to my sales manager, SM, and told him the situation. He told me he would take care of it, but to be patient for now. I went back to my desk full of anxiety and my stomach doing backflips. SM went to the desk where EM was to work out the deal. They're far enough that I can hear their voices, but not pinpoint what they're saying. But I did hear her eventually yell, "How dare you! I would never steal! Do you want to lose this sale?" I immediately got up and went over behind the lady so SM could see me, but she couldn't. He tells her he understands, but my iPad went missing and he wants to make sure no one currently in the building has it. That's when I remembered the Find My feature on all Apple products. My iPad was connected to the dealer's Wi-Fi, so I pulled out my iPhone and pressed play sound for my iPad. Her purse started dinging. She tried to play it off as if it's her ringtone, and SM stared at her as if daring her to answer it. The thing is, with the play sound feature, if I keep pressing it, it will keep pinging. I made my presence known and told her to give my iPad back. That's when she stopped playing dumb and just said, "Just let NG have it, her birthday is coming up and I can't afford a present for her since I'm getting this car." SM said he was happy to cancel the deal so she can instead buy a birthday present for her child and to return my iPad, or he'll call the police. She practically threw my iPad at me where it hit me in the gut, and took NG from the waiting area to leave. Poor thing looked at me with the most apologetic look on her face before leaving with her mother. SM might have helped me, but he's not exactly the nicest person. From now on, I'm not allowed to bring my iPad to the dealer. I have to either leave it in my car or leave it at home. Whatever. EM took my Apple Pencil with her since she left in a hurry, so I'm gonna stop by the Apple store after work to get a new one. But until then, I'm stuck with my pens and notepad. The next story is titled,
Entitled Woman Tries and Fails to Take My Job. So I'm an instructor at a small college. I teach artsy vocational classes and only have an MFA, and my school really favors more academic PhDs. This was all told to me when I was hired, but the dean at the time was incredibly kind about this and gave me a secret boost in pay to make up for the lack of favor. She told me that even though I would never be promoted, my area of expertise was valued, and as long as I stayed in my lane, I was very welcome. So, before I ever got my tenure, I worked for a few years and developed a slate of very popular classes that filled every semester. I was very happy and grateful to have the job. Titles mean nothing to me, and I was just happy to be successful at a job I loved that helped people. I also learned very quickly to never step on the toes of more senior faculty. I stayed in my lane. Then, a woman was hired in another subgroup of my department. I never met her, nor was I involved in her hiring. She had nothing to do with me, but she does have a PhD. Then, before I ever met her, I saw her on social media that she announced she would soon be teaching all my classes, and she was delighted to be doing that. I was shocked because I went through a rigorous hiring process, and I'm exceptionally qualified to teach in my area. She has no publications in my area, and her degrees are only vaguely related to my area. I figured my chair would put her in her place, but I was wrong. Instead, I was called into the chair's office and told EW is very interested in what you do and wants to help you. I stared my chair down. EW has a degree in X, and she was hired to do Y. That doesn't have anything to do with me. Chair size. Her degree is multidisciplinary, and she is more than qualified. This shocked me because it was way out of protocol. There was a pecking order, one that I had followed. This shocked me because I was way out of protocol. This shocked me because it was way out of protocol. There was a pecking order, one that I had followed. I also realized very quickly that if I gave in, I would have no job, and I would be shunted off to teach stuff I wasn't qualified to teach. This gave me the courage to resist, and resist I did. Multiple meetings with my chair followed, in which I was painted with the stigma of being difficult and unsupportive. Honestly, if the woman had one shred of business teaching in my area, I probably would have succumbed to the pressure. But she was not qualified either by degree, experience, or publications. That made me mad. Meanwhile, an older colleague, who had been terrible to me and made me cry a few times, pulled me aside one day. Apparently, she had grown to respect that I wasn't letting the chair bully me. She told me to never verbalize permission for EW to take over any of my classes. Apparently, the rules of the school were, and are, that I was the one who decided who could sub for me or take over for me. I held firm. I was bullied over and over again. One time, my chair very nearly physically threatened me and said, "Why can't you just say it?" Chair had no idea I had been tipped off why I needed to say it. I was told by another colleague that EW is bored with her area, and she doesn't like what she got a degree in, and she only did that area because it's easier to get hired. I said her life choices weren't my problem and stood firm. My chair threatened not to support my tenure, but I actually had a bulletproof application. Chair couldn't do anything. Shunned by many colleagues, some of whom I thought were my friends, I was called angry and unreasonable. On a good day, a bitch on the worst. One day, the sweet, dear lady who had been responsible for hiring EW actually cried an apology, saying she was sickened by what was happening to me. EW had been their last choice, and the only person they could get. This sweet, lovely woman wailed that EW was obnoxious and terrible. She also said that many people in the department supported me, but were scared off the chair. She said I should just keep resisting. At least twice I was at school events, and when I told the person both times, higher-up administrators, what I taught, they said, "Oh, I thought EW did that." I had to correct them, so I got tenure and stood firm. Meanwhile, a former student who was now teaching at a community college nearby told me EW was teaching there. He provided me with her bio from their website. Her listed credentials were my credentials. Luckily, that didn't last long. She didn't have the expertise, so I guess that gig just fizzled. One thing I never did was meet with EW. I was asked to, so we could hash things out, and I said repeatedly that there was nothing to hash. I was happy in my job, and my job wasn't her job. I was always polite and professional if I had to deal with her, but I always avoided any potential traps. They wanted my verbal permission. I wouldn't give it. Finally, the chair stepped down. The next chair initially sided with the majority because he didn't know me very well. But then he got to know me and was fair. Eventually, EW stopped trying to do my job. She pushed her way into another area, and now she steers clear of mine. It really did take about 10 years to wear her down. So there was no real dramatic ending. I just held firm, and eventually, EW gave up. The reason I'm sharing is recently another colleague told me that he always thought EW and the chair were having an affair, and this is why everything happened. Maybe I'm naive, but the thought never crossed my mind. Plus, EW is actually not attractive at all, so I couldn't picture it. Anyway, over the years, whenever EW has done anything terrible or stupid, my colleagues will always share it with me. Still, I actually have little ill will left for her. I won most of the battles and the war, and that's good enough. I still love my job and my students, and I'm glad I fought for it. They say academia is the Game of Thrones without the beheadings. Fair, I think. The next story is titled Private HOA Police Seized My Farm Property and Kicked Me Out. I'm not even part of the HOA. Growing up, I always heard stories about homeowners associations, HOAs, being a bit controlling, but I never thought it could get as bad as it did in my South African neighborhood. Our HOA was more like a gang, using bullying tactics and violence to coerce residents into joining. I refused to join, and for a while they left me and my farm alone. But as they got more desperate, they turned on to more aggressive tactics. The first time the HOA police showed up at my property, they turned their cars on my land and left the bright lights on, disrupting my sleep. It wasn't a fun time, but I was determined to stand my ground. I had built my farm from the ground up, and I wasn't going to let them bully me into joining an organization I didn't believe in. I tried to ignore their constant letters about owing them dues, but the harassment only escalated from there. I came home one day to find garbage dumped on my lawn, and another time I found my mailbox destroyed. They even threw eggs at my house, but I was unfazed. As a farmer, I was used to cleaning up messes, and I had plenty of eggs of my own. The most terrifying encounter I had with the HOA gang was when they showed up at my doorsteps holding cricket bats. They claimed they just wanted to talk about me joining the HOA, but I could see the intimidation in their eyes. It wasn't until I revealed my gun that they finally left, but things only got worse from there. I began to receive fines for not paying my non-existent bills, and the HOA police started showing up at all hours of the day and night. I knew I had to fight back. It took months of gathering evidence and testimonies, but I was finally able to take the HOA to court. The judge was appalled by the HOA's illegal activities, including the use of a private police force and their illegal eviction of me from my own property. The judge found the HOA guilty and ordered them to pay a heavy fine, including my house taxes and expenses for the time I was kept off my property. The HOA was also required to dissolve their private police force and were warned not to engage in any further illegal activities. I was relieved that justice was served, but it wasn't the end of my battle. The HOA was stubborn and refused to admit defeat. They began to appeal the court's decision, dragging the legal process on for months. It was a frustrating and emotionally exhausting time, but I was determined to see it through to the end. Finally, after many long months of legal battles, the HOA lost their final appeal. They were forced to pay their fines they had been avoiding, and I was awarded additional compensation for the pain and suffering they had caused me. The judge ordered the HOA to shut down entirely, and they were banned from ever forming another HOA or private police force. It was a hard-fought victory, but in the end, I had regained my farm and exposed the corrupt practices of the HOA gang. But the story doesn't end there. A few years after the legal battle, I received a call from a neighbor who had just moved into the area. They had purchased a home from one of the former HOA members and had uncovered a shocking discovery. The HOA had been stealing money from residents for years, pocketing the dues they were supposed to go towards community improvements and maintenance. The neighbor had found documents detailing the theft and embezzlement, and they were able to provide evidence that led to the arrest and conviction of the HOA's leaders. The former HOA president and several other members were found guilty of theft, fraud, and other charges related to the embezzlement of funds from residents. They were sentenced to several years in prison and ordered to pay restitution for all the homeowners who had been affected by their illegal actions. The news was a shock to the community, but it was also a relief. For years we had suspected that something was wrong with the HOA, but we never had any concrete evidence to prove it. With the help of my neighbor and the evidence they had uncovered, justice was finally served. But the story doesn't end there. After the HOA leaders were sent to prison, the community was left in disarray. But we knew that something needed to be done to ensure that the community could move forward and thrive. Together, a group of us started a new neighborhood association, one that was built on transparency and accountability. We made it our mission to ensure that every resident had a voice in the decisions that were made and that all dues were being used for the betterment of the community. It wasn't easy, but we worked hard to gain the trust of the residents and make positive changes in the neighborhood. We held regular meetings and open forums to discuss the issues that were important to the community, and we made sure that everyone had a say in the decisions that were made. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to flourish. The streets were cleaner, the parks were better maintained, and the sense of community was stronger than ever before. We had overcome the corruption of the past and had to build something new and better in its place. Looking back on my experience with the corrupt HOA gang, I'm proud of the fight I put up and the justice that was served. But I'm even more proud of the community that we've built since then, one that is stronger and more resilient than ever before. It's a testament to the power of people coming together to fight for what's right and make a positive difference in the world. The next story is titled Back from College Break to Have Nothing. My daughter, a 19-year-old female, had a group of high school friends for years. Fast forward freshman year college, and her new roommate becomes part of the friend group. I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer the same day that she started classes that year. As the year goes on, her relationship with some of her friends starts to have problems. But the roommate still seems solid, so they sign a lease for sophomore year. By the beginning of sophomore year, all of her high school friends, 4, had turned on my daughter, and she's struggling to find out why. By the end of September, she finds out the roommate had been playing both sides of the fence and has ultimately sided with my daughter's old friends and continues to see them regularly. This, of course, creates a nasty living situation for my daughter, but she does her best to manage through. As time goes on, I come to find out that her friends turned on her because they felt that her emotional needs were toxic for them to be around. My daughter was having a panic attack about my cancer and other normal things and was reaching out to her friends for someone to talk to, and they couldn't handle it. A few weeks ago, the roommate invited 2 of these friends to stay over. My daughter asked that they pick another time as she had work and then a night ahead of her finishing her finals, and she didn't want to be in the apartment if they were going to be. The roommate ignored the request. My daughter walked into them being there after work and had a panic attack. The roommate looked at her and said, "See, this is why you have no friends. When you behave like this, what do you expect?" This week, my daughter managed to find a way to move out before the roommate came back from break. The couch, the coffee table, the rug, the pots and pans, the dishes, the shower curtain, and on, all of it was my daughter's. The internet, the electric, the water, all in my daughter's name. She took everything, moved out, and left the roommate to come back from break with none of it working, and all of the shared space items gone, and left her a note signed, "What did you expect?" Oh, I wish I could be a fly on the wall when she walks in. The last story is titled, "Mom Wanted to Live Off My Income Once I Graduated." Growing up, my mom had told me she was raising me to be the best child because she knew I would achieve more. My mom was way harsher on my grades, sports, academic clubs, looks, and personal life than my little brother. I admit I grew up hating my little brother for all the freedom he had, while I was always isolated. I was always grounded. I was working multiple jobs to not only save up for college, but help with my family bills. When my brother got a job, he was able to spend the money on what he wanted. My mom told me what my career goal was, what person I should marry, how she will move in with me after I buy my house to raise the children and take care of her. My mom was the type to blow money on designer stuff while we slept in hotels and cars at one point. I hated being poor. All I wanted was a house growing up. A nice small, nice house for us. If I dated someone my mom didn't approve, she would do everything to sabotage the relationship because they were not good enough for me. Well, when I got to law school and was getting my JD, when I met my now current boyfriend, you know they say when you know, you know. Gosh, did we know right away. Moved me in after 3 days and have not been away from each other since. I love his family and they also love me. He was raised upper middle class and had an amazing set of parents. He was also top of the law school and just felt too perfect for me. My mom disagreed. She didn't like him one bit because anytime she said something to make herself look smart, he called her out and said, "Nope, you're wrong." Provided facts and even showed his sources. Oh, she hates to be proven wrong. I told my boyfriend how my mom raised me and what she expects from me growing up. Well, he wasn't going to have it. He said she would be lucky to even know her grandchildren. My mom started to see her plans unraveling with my new boyfriend and tried to break us up multiple times. When she started making fun of his parents, he drew the line. He called her out and said we were done with her. The panic was real for my mom in this moment. It was her meal ticket. She demanded that I made a choice, my own mother or a man I was only dating for a year. I chose my boyfriend. We have been together for almost 3 years. I dropped from law school and work remotely at an amazing job. He graduated top of his class and was hired immediately. Our income is way above what I expected. and sometimes cry at night for how blessed I feel. Growing up, I always begged to have a home that I could call my own. Now, we may have a home together in a few years. She will send threats and make up excuses to try to contact me in order to get back in my life. We plan to get married soon and know we have to keep it really quiet because she will either call in a threat or try to show up. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.